It was a warm summer evening on July 9th, 1999, when a woman suddenly disappeared in Beaumont, Texas. Her name was Kimberly Ann Langwell, 34 years old, a devoted single mother who deeply loved her daughter, Tiffany. That day, she called Tiffany and promised she'd be home soon. But Kimberly would never return home again. A few hours later, her car was discovered in a pharmacy parking lot. The engine was off. The doors were locked, as if she had just stepped away for a brief moment. Yet Kimberly herself was nowhere to be found. For the next 25 years, the case grew cold, fading from the public's memory. But in 2024, after decades of silence, the gears of this forgotten mystery began to turn once more. Kimberly Ann Langwell was born on February 24, 1965 in Houston, Texas. At 18, she became a mother. The man who was supposed to be the father disappeared shortly after Tiffany's birth, leaving Kimberly alone with her baby and an uncertain future. But she didn't complain, at least not where anyone could hear. Determined to build a new life, Kimberly left her hometown of Houston and moved to Beaumont, a small industrial city in southeastern Texas. Back then, Beaumont had a population of around 110,000. It was a place shaped by oil, a city that had been transformed overnight by one of the most famous oil discoveries in American history. On January 10, 1901, at the Spindletop oil field, black crude shot 45 meters into the air, as tall as a 15-story building. More than 100,000 barrels a day poured from the ground, and within just 2 months, the population exploded from 9,000 to 30,000. People flooded in from across the country, chasing the promise of fortune. A century later, Beaumont still lived and breathed that black blood. Oil ran through the city's veins. Located along the Texas Gulf Coast, the skyline was pierced by the towering smokestacks of ExxonMobil, Texaco, and other petroleum giants. The air carried the sharp scent of chemicals. The summers were thick and humid, and even in winter, the refinery flames painted the night sky red. It wasn't a beautiful place, but it was a place where people could find steady work. Even single mothers like Kimberly. For her, it was enough. It was a place to start over. She devoted herself to raising Tiffany while working at an oil refinery. Life as a single mother was anything but easy, but Kimberly never showed weakness. She poured unconditional love into Tiffany, who grew into a teenager of 15. Friends remembered Kimberly as bright, beautiful, and magnetic, someone who drew others in effortlessly. Life hadn't been kind to her, but she never let anyone see the weight she carried. 6 months before she vanished, Kimberly ended her 7-year relationship with her boyfriend, Terry Rose. The breakup was far from peaceful. It was intense, emotional, and left deep scars. 3 months later, she met a new man, Ken Weatherford. He was gentle, and their relationship quickly blossomed. They even spoke of marriage. At 34, Kimberly believed in second chances. She believed that pain belonged to the past, and that a new chapter of her life was just beginning. Friday, July 9th, 1999. The Texas sun was sinking toward the horizon, glowing a deep blood red. It was an ordinary summer evening. The air was heavy with humidity, and the scent of oil lingered over the entire city. Kimberly finished her workday as usual and left her office in Beaumont at exactly 5 p.m. That evening, she planned to meet her daughter Tiffany and her fiancé Ken for a simple family dinner. It was supposed to be a quiet, ordinary Friday night, the kind people often take for granted. At 5:15 p.m., just 15 minutes after leaving work, Kimberly called Tiffany. She told her she needed to stop by Terry's house to take care of something and that she might be a little late, but she promised to be home by 6:30. Those were the last words Tiffany ever heard from her mother. The final promise Kimberly Ann Langwell would make to the daughter she loved. 6:30 came and went. Tiffany and Ken waited at home, but Kimberly didn't return. Their calls went unanswered. a quiet sense of unease began to spread through the house. The clock struck 7, then 8, then 9. The phone stayed silent. No engine sounded in the driveway. Only the stillness of the night echoed like a grim omen. By 10 p.m., Ken couldn't sit still any longer. He got in his car and began retracing Kimberly's possible route, from Terry's house to her workplace, to local bars and supermarket parking lots she might have stopped at. And then, he found it. In the parking lot of an Eckerd pharmacy in Beaumont, he spotted Kimberly's silver 1994 Nissan Altima. But Kimberly wasn't inside. Sensing something was very wrong, Ken called the police immediately. Beaumont officers arrived soon after and began examining the vehicle. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no damage to the car. Everything appeared strangely normal, almost too normal. Inside, her wallet, cell phone, keys, and makeup bag were still there. The only things missing were her handbag and car keys. The car itself had no mechanical issues, no accident damage, and was parked neatly. It looked as if someone had deliberately left it there. Adding to the mystery, the pharmacy wasn't a place Kimberly normally visited. Her family and friends all insisted she had no reason to be there. And later, investigators found no evidence she had ever entered the store that evening. In 1999, surveillance cameras weren't everywhere like they are today. There was no video showing how her car ended up in that lot. After that final phone call, the trail simply went cold. It was as if Kimberly had vanished into thin air, swallowed by the darkness of the night, without leaving a trace. From the very beginning, no one believed Kimberly had disappeared by choice. She loved her daughter deeply and had reasons to look forward to the future. The way her car was found only strengthened this belief. Her wallet, phone, and other personal items were left behind inside the car. If she had decided to leave on her own, those would have been the first things she'd take with her. And in 1999, cell phones didn't have GPS tracking, so there was no reason to abandon it to avoid being traced. On July 10th, the day after her disappearance, Beaumont police officially began treating the case as a criminal investigation. But the car itself offered few clues, and the investigation stalled early on. There was, however, one crucial lead: the identity of the person Kimberly was supposed to meet that evening. The first person detectives focused on was her ex-boyfriend, Terry Rose. Terry was 8 years older than Kimberly, a small but successful business owner who ran a towing service and a record shop in Beaumont. Outwardly, he was well off and respected in the community. In the early days of their relationship, they were seen as an ideal couple. But it didn't take long for his true nature to surface. Behind the facade, Terry was controlling, violent, and obsessively possessive. He tightly monitored Kimberly's movements and became increasingly unstable. Kimberly's childhood friend, Ingrid Dunn, later said, "At first he seemed kind and charming, but over time his possessiveness became frightening. It turned into a toxic relationship." Another acquaintance, Terry Griggs Bowers, recalled, "He was always hovering around her. He just wouldn't let her go. She was genuinely scared of him." The most chilling testimony came from Esther Randall, who loved Kimberly like a daughter. She tried to leave him many times, but he would physically stop her from walking out the door. He told her over and over again, "If you go to another man, I'll kill you." Terry would lose his temper over the smallest things. He slapped her, choked her, and constantly kept her under his watch. Some of these incidents were documented in police records. Their toxic relationship dragged on for 7 years. But in 1999, Kimberly finally broke it off. The final straw was Terry's infidelity. He had cheated on her with one of her friends. When Kimberly confronted him and tried to throw him out of the house, he snapped. He grabbed her by the throat and attacked her so violently that it could easily have ended in murder. This final assault left Kimberly deeply shaken. Even after their breakup, Terry's obsession didn't fade. When he found out Kimberly had started a new relationship with Ken Weatherford, He continued trying to keep her tied to him. He gave her a new cell phone, and when he heard she was going on a trip to Mexico with friends, he even gave her $500 to help fund it. But Kimberly didn't take that trip with friends. She went with Ken. When Terry later learned that she'd used his money to vacation with her new boyfriend, he was furious. Kimberly's daughter Tiffany had always disliked Terry. She recalled, "He constantly belittled my mom, always acting like he controlled everything. I told her many times I didn't want to be around him. We argued about it a lot." Kimberly had confided her fears about Terry to several people. One friend remembered her saying, "If anything ever happens to me, look in Terry's backyard." From the very start, Kimberly's family and friends pointed to Terry as the likely suspect. And police knew he had both motive and temperament. Control, jealousy, and revenge. All powerful, dangerous emotions. But Terry maintained his innocence throughout. During questioning, he admitted Kimberly had stopped by his house that evening to ask for help installing a shelf. He said she left after a few minutes. According to him, he stayed home alone until about 9:45 p.m., then went to a nearby pool hall called Corner Pocket. But there was something odd about that statement. Corner Pocket was located in the same commercial complex as the Eckerd Pharmacy where Kimberly's car was found. They shared the same parking lot. In other words, Terry claimed to have spent that night in the exact same place where Kimberly's car mysteriously appeared. Was this really just a coincidence? Detectives had their doubts, but they lacked the evidence to prove otherwise. The case was already showing signs of becoming a dead end. And soon, a second suspect would emerge. The next person to come under police scrutiny was a man named Frank McCormick. Frank was 49 years old at the time of the disappearance. He worked as Kimberly's supervisor at the chemical plant where she was employed. Though married, Frank developed an unhealthy, obsessive fixation on Kimberly. To call him a mere admirer would be misleading. He was, in every sense, a stalker. Within the workplace, he used his position of authority to pursue his twisted desires openly, without shame. According to police, Frank had sent Kimberly more than 100 love letters. For Kimberly, these were not tokens of affection. They were evidence of something far more sinister. She kept the letters carefully bundled and even entrusted them to a close friend, in case anything happened to her. Frank's disturbing behavior didn't stop at ink and paper. After work, he would drive through her neighborhood, parking across the street from her home and watching her from the shadows. In the quiet darkness of a suburban street, his presence must have felt like a nightmare slowly closing in. On one occasion, Frank even offered to pay several $1,000s for Kimberly and Tiffany to take a trip to Europe together. She turned him down immediately, but that only deepened her fear. She knew all too well how dangerous a rejected man's rage could be. Investigators began to suspect that Kimberly might have fallen victim to Frank's obsessive desires. It was not an unreasonable theory. When questioned, Frank admitted to writing the letters, but dismissed them as nothing more than harmless admiration from the past. He claimed he didn't clearly remember what he had written. As for the night Kimberly vanished, Frank stated that he had been playing poker with friends nearby. 8 people backed up his story, giving him a strong alibi for that evening. But not everything added up. Before the poker game, Frank had gone grocery shopping, and he used the receipt to support his timeline. However, there was a gap of over an hour between the time he left work and the time stamped on that supermarket receipt. An hour he couldn't account for. An hour may not sound like much, but it's more than enough time to change the course of someone's life. What exactly was Frank McCormick doing during that missing hour? For the next quarter century, the disappearance of Kimberly Ann Langwell remained an unsolved mystery. No suspect was ever charged. No remains were ever found. Even the single clue, her abandoned car, led investigators nowhere. Early on, 2 key suspects had been identified, but with no physical evidence, the case entered a long and frustrating period of stagnation. Detectives strongly suspected her ex-boyfriend, Terry Rose. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Without a body or definitive proof, they couldn't build a case strong enough for an arrest. The same was true for Frank McCormick. His obsessive stalking and disturbing behavior painted a frightening picture, but none of it amounted to evidence of murder. From the beginning, police never once believed Kimberly had vanished voluntarily. She adored her only daughter. The idea that she would abandon Tiffany without explanation, emotionally or logically, simply didn't make sense. Her bank accounts showed no activity after her disappearance. Authorities were forced to conclude that Kimberly was no longer alive. But without a body, the investigation could go no further. For her family, especially Tiffany, the 25 years that followed were a relentless emotional ordeal. As a teenager, she had to navigate the most formative years of her life without her mother by her side. Tiffany later said, "The first few years were the hardest. Every milestone, graduating high school, becoming an adult, I felt the pain of not having her there. The family never gave up. Every year on Kimberly's birthday and the day she disappeared, they held candlelight vigils. Small flames lit the darkness, keeping hope alive. They put up posters, pleaded for information, and refused to let the world forget the name, Kimberly Ann Langwell." And after 25 years of silence, their efforts finally caught the attention of a powerful ally: television. In 2023, the hit true crime investigative show Cold Justice turned its focus to Kimberly's case. Since its debut in 2013, the show had led to 24 convictions and 59 arrests, a remarkable track record that changed how real investigations viewed television's role. Police departments across the U.S. had begun working hand in hand with the show's team. Beaumont Police welcomed the collaboration. Detectives joined forces with prosecutor-turned-investigator Kelly Siegler and her team to re-examine the case. They interviewed Kimberly's family, her friends, and the two long-standing persons of interest, Terry Rose and Frank McCormick. Frank agreed to be interviewed on camera. He calmly admitted to having feelings for Kimberly, but denied any involvement in her disappearance. His interview offered nothing new beyond what police already knew. Terry Rose's reaction was entirely different. When the crew arrived at his property, he appeared visibly shaken. He jumped into his truck, seemingly trying to flee. Siegler and her team stopped him, and he reluctantly agreed to talk. Throughout the interview, he appeared tense and uncomfortable, as if sitting on a bed of nails. And in that short conversation, inconsistencies began to emerge. Terry insisted that after their breakup, he had no contact with Kimberly. He denied arguing with her and claimed he never gave her $500. But this directly contradicted statements from Kimberly's family and friends. Even more telling was how his story about that evening had changed. Back in 1999, he told police Kimberly came by to ask for help installing a shelf. In the 2023 interview, he claimed she stopped by only to pick up some personal belongings. Was it fading memory or a deliberate shift in his story? When pressed, Terry's composure cracked. He stiffened, stammered, and abruptly ended the conversation. The show's team also revisited his potential motive. While Terry's obsession was growing, Kimberly was looking forward to a future with her new boyfriend. For a man who had controlled her for years, watching her move on was likely a deep humiliation. They discovered another detail. On the day she vanished, Kimberly had been wearing a t-shirt from her Cancun trip, a trip funded by the $500 Terry had given her. She returned from that romantic getaway with Ken, wearing that souvenir shirt. For Terry, this was a visual reminder of her independence and his betrayal. Kelly Siegler described the circumstances of that day as a perfect storm, multiple emotional triggers converging at once. The investigation also uncovered new testimony. A former employee who worked at Terry's shop came forward. He told investigators he saw Kimberly's car parked near Terry's home at around 5:50 p.m. that evening. By 6:20 p.m., the car was gone. This confirmed that Kimberly had indeed visited Terry's house that evening, and that something happened shortly after. Former Detective Abby Abondondolo, part of the Cold Justice team, explained, If Terry killed her at his house, he would have needed to get rid of her car immediately to avoid suspicion. As an experienced tow truck operator, he could have quietly moved the car and left it at the pharmacy parking lot in no time. The Cold Justice team and local investigators came to the same conclusion. The evidence pointed strongly to Terry Rose. In April 2024, the episode aired nationwide. The Kimberly Ann Langwell case suddenly found itself back in the spotlight, and soon after the broadcast, the investigation took a shocking turn. The broadcast of Cold Justice reignited public interest in the long-dormant mystery of Kimberly Ann Langwell's disappearance. And less than a month after the episode aired, a crucial piece of information reached investigators, a breakthrough that would finally crack the case. The tip came from a woman who had once been in a relationship with Terry Rose. She told police, "He told me that on the night of July 9, 1999, he killed her at his house and buried her." It was the testimony investigators had been waiting for. With this new information, the task force swiftly obtained a search warrant. After 25 years, they were finally ready to dig for the truth. On June 10, 2014, law enforcement gathered at 1655 Lindbergh Street in Beaumont, Texas, Terry's home, which also served as his tow yard. It was an ordinary house on an ordinary street, but no one knew what secrets were buried beneath its floors. The search effort was massive. Local police joined forces with the FBI's Houston Evidence Response Team, the ATF, the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office, and the renowned search and recovery organization, Texas EquiSearch. Tim Miller, the founder of Texas EquiSearch, arrived at the scene with ground-penetrating radar, GPR. This technology emits radar waves into the ground and analyzes the reflections to detect objects, voids, or disturbances below the surface, without excavation. A few days into the search, investigators scanned the bedroom floor with the radar. That's when they noticed something unusual. In one specific section of the foundation, the reinforcing steel and wire mesh that would normally be continuous had been cut, creating a rectangular void roughly 90 by 150 centimeters in size. Tim Miller later recalled, "You could clearly see where the rebar and mesh had been cut out. I knew right then this was not normal. It was the perfect size for a burial." Such a gap would never occur in proper construction. This was clear evidence of deliberate human alteration. Someone had opened a hole and later sealed it with concrete. The team immediately began cutting through the slab. Workers used concrete saws to carefully open the section. Heavy machinery was brought in, and as the floor was lifted away, a dark void was revealed beneath. Under the beam of flashlights, investigators began to dig slowly with shovels, scraping away layers of earth that had gone untouched for decades. And then, in the early hours of Friday, June 13th, at around 3 a.m., they found it. Wrapped in a blanket, human remains emerged from the soil beneath the bedroom floor. For 25 long years, they had lain undisturbed beneath a slab of concrete, entombed in silence. Kimberly had once told a friend, "If anything ever happens to me, look in Terry's backyard." It wasn't the backyard. It was beneath the bedroom. But her instinct had been tragically correct. Inside Terry Rose's home, beneath the floor, the remains believed to be Kimberly Ann Langwell were quietly waiting to be found. Just hours after the remains were found, at 6:15 p.m. on June 13, 2024, the wheels of justice finally began to turn, shaking off 25 years of rust. Terry Rose, now 67 years old, was arrested by the Beaumont Police Special Investigations Unit on charges of murder committed a quarter of a century earlier. He was taken to the police station, then disappeared behind the cold iron bars of a cell.
Terry Rose, you're being charged with the murder of Kimberly Langwell. Do you have anything to say?
Terry, tell us what happened on that night in 1999. This could be your only chance to tell the public right now, right here.
Do you have anything to say to Kimberly's family?
Did you do it? Tell us why you did it.
Do you feel any remorse?
The next morning, June 14th, Beaumont police held a press conference to announce the details of the investigation and the arrest. It was attended not only by local officers, but also the FBI's Houston Field Office, the ATF, the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office, and members of Texas EquiSearch, a gathering of everyone who had helped bring this historic case to a close.
You're witnessing something that rarely ever happens. This is an extraordinary case. 25 years, cold case, homicide, and the body was not found until yesterday. That's amazing. These folks behind us are the ones that did it. I am so proud of the relationships that Beaumont PD has developed over the years. I've got to thank first the FBI ERT team. These folks are amazing. I was impressed so much by them on TV, and in real life, they're even better. With you folks take one step forward. ERT, come on. They're up at 4 o'clock this morning, and they still look fresh as a daisy. I cannot tell you how much work they put into this. The FBI really stood tall for Beaumont PD today, and we want to thank them very much. Thank you, guys. They even had a TV show, Cold Case Files, and did get a great response out of that show.
The police chief spoke about how officers had maintained contact with Kimberly's family over the years and how crucial it was to finally give them the closure they had waited for. It wasn't a scripted line. It was the truth. Officer Carol Riley had been involved with the case since the very beginning, staying in touch with Kimberly's family for 25 long years. Her dedication embodied the power of persistence and human compassion.
This has been a long 25 years for Kimberly Langwell's family. We want this to encourage all families that are missing a loved one or have a case that's unsolved and know that we never give up. Anything that comes in, we continue. We want those answers for everyone. We don't sleep well at night when we know there's a child wondering where their mom is or their dad or, a best friend that lost someone that might as well have been family to them. So, yes, we take these cases personal.
On June 15, 2024, a Jefferson County grand jury formally indicted Terry Rose for murder. Under Texas law, premeditated murder carries some of the harshest penalties, including life imprisonment. Prosecutors stated that they viewed the crime as clearly premeditated, triggered by the breakup, and planned to pursue aggravating factors to seek a life sentence. In preparation for trial, investigators began re-interviewing witnesses and individuals connected to the case, strengthening the evidentiary foundation of a crime committed decades earlier. The court set Terry's bail at $1 million. Even if bail were granted, he would be subject to strict conditions, GPS monitoring and travel restrictions. But few believed he had the means to post bail. To this day, Terry Rose remains behind bars. The bird named Freedom will never return to his hands again. Weeks later, DNA testing confirmed what many already knew in their hearts. The remains found beneath the concrete floor belonged to Kimberly Ann Langwell. After 25 years entombed beneath stone and silence, Kimberly finally returned home to her family. Her identity, her dignity, long stolen, had at last been restored. She had always known where she was. Her intuition had been right. The invisible bond between a mother and her child had withstood death, time, and concrete. It had never been broken.
It's a long time coming, and I'm so very grateful to have my mother back. Not in the way that I wanted her, but to know that she's no longer being held is a good feeling. I've known that since the day that she was gone. She's been there, so it's tough. It's tough to know where your mom is and know that there's nothing you can do. Well, I don't believe that we will ever know truly what happened besides what the evidence is going to show. But I've always known that she's there.
The disappearance and murder of Kimberly Ann Langwell left behind powerful lessons about the devastating consequences of domestic violence and obsessive stalking. The first lesson is one we must never forget. When a person consumed by obsession and control is forced to face rejection, they can transform into something truly monstrous. Terry Rose could not accept that Kimberly was leaving him. Greater than, "If I can't have you, no one will." Those words were not empty threats. They became a deadly promise. Sadly, tragedies like this are far from rare. Stories where love turns to hatred and passion twists into violence happen again and again. Even though Kimberly sensed the danger, the tragedy could not be prevented, a heartbreaking reality. But this case is also a story of hope, of how modern technology and media can breathe new life into a cold case long thought forgotten. After 25 years, it was the national broadcast of Cold Justice that reignited the investigation. The program drew attention to the case and encouraged a key witness, silent for decades, to finally come forward. Before we close, it's worth remembering the words of Officer Carol Riley, who stood by Kimberly's family for 25 years. To those out there who think they've gotten away with something, know this: greater than, technology is always advancing. Sleep with one eye open. We are always digging. She was right. The wheels of justice may rust, but they never truly stop turning. Terry Rose's legal battle is not over yet. His criminal trial, originally scheduled for spring 2025, was postponed for various reasons raised by the defense. His attorneys argued that due to his age and health issues, he was not mentally competent to stand trial. But on June 11, 2025, a psychological evaluation determined he was fit to face justice. The final obstacle has been removed. The trial is expected to proceed in the latter half of 2025. This story is not yet fully over. As new developments unfold, they will be shared with the world. Cases like this remind us that time may pass, but the search for truth never fades. For 25 years, Kimberly Langwell's disappearance left a painful mystery behind. Thanks to tireless investigators, community support, and unwavering persistence, justice has finally taken a step forward. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Your support helps us bring more real-life mysteries and stories to light and keep the memories of victims alive. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.